What if I told you that the 2025 Ferrari was never a bad car, but they simply did not know how to use it? What if Lewis Hamilton has just demonstrated that the problem in Maranello was not a technician, but human? In a sport where every millimeter of experience can decide a race, where aerodynamics and tire management are almost exact sciences, what happened with Lewis Hamilton in Monza 2025 was not only a surprise, it was a technical scandal that broke with everything Ferrari believed to know about his own car. Telemetry does not lie. And this time, the data did not leave room for interpretation. What Hamilton did about the SF25 was so neat, so mechanically perfect, that the engineers in Maranello went from disbelief to absolute silence. Because everything they had said for the middle season about the bad behavior of the car was completely invalidated. The sensors installed in the SF25 revealed an unprecedented data sequence in the season, especially in the sector of Lesmo 2, a medium rapid curve where traction when leaving is critical and where Ferrari had been systematically weak. Since the beginning of the year, that curve had been defined by the technicians themselves as the greatest enemy of the car for the erratic behavior of the rear axle. No pilot had managed to pass through that area without steering wheel corrections, without waste of time in the traction, without a constant feeling of instability. Until now. Hamilton was not only faster than his immediate rivals at that point, such as Norris or Piastri, but did it with inhuman consistency. Return after return, he recorded exactly the same 246 km/h of output speed. There was no margin of variation. There was no visible degradation. Only a perfect line in each graph. That fact, which at first glance may seem a smaller figure, becomes technical gold when analyzing together. It's not just that I was going faster, I did it without forcing. Without micro-corrections. No stress for the car or for tires. The SF25 seemed to float, as if he had released from all the balancing and subwiring chains that had been pursued from the first test in Bahrain. Longitudinal stability maps, usually plagued with vibrations and inconsistencies in braking and accelerations, now presented a straight line without peaks. A kind of flat electrocardiogram that, in F1, means operational perfection. Even more shocking was the contrast to Charles Leclerc, who used an almost identical configuration, but failed to replicate a fraction of Hamilton's fluidity. The Monegasco once again showed the signals of internal struggle with the car. Constant corrections in the steering wheel, thermal variations of up to 12 degrees between the left and right rear tires, and a loss of traction that forced him to lift in areas where Hamilton simply stepped on and left. This difference, invisible to television, became evident in internal data. And it was devastating. Ferrari's own engineers, seeing these graphics, admitted that they did not have a logical explanation. Some even considered that Hamilton had touched a peak of symbiosis with the car, as if the pilot had understood the exact language of each input, each mass transfer, each point of flexion of the chassis. What should have been one more proof of the problems of SF25 became the final judgment to the way Ferrari had interpreted its development since the beginning of the season. And that was when Nico Rosberg, present at the paddock as an analyst sports F1, observed the data and simply remained speechless. Rosberg, who has been characterized by his critical tone towards Hamilton, tried to start an analysis, but stopped, because there was nothing to criticize. Only numbers. Cold, incontestable, perfect. What really differentiates the great pilots of the legendary is not the ability to adapt to a perfect car, but the boldness of taking performance from a car that nobody else knows how to tame. In Monza 2025, Lewis Hamilton took a risk that no other pilot on the grill, not even his own teammate, had dared to assume. He asked Ferrari for an extreme configuration, not to soften the unstable behavior of SF25, but to amplify it. While everyone asked for a more predictable, more docile car, Hamilton asked otherwise. I wanted a wild, demanding, unpredictable car in each curve input. And most importantly, I thought I could control it. What this generates is an internal dynamic that could be described as a mechanical paradox. When you release the brake and turn the steering wheel, the car becomes almost ungovernable, nervous, inclined to flying. But if the pilot manages to control that initial chaos, the exit becomes a pure power line, a catapult towards the next line. It is a very high bet. An error and you are out. But Hamilton knew exactly what he was looking for. Because beyond the data, what Lewis did was risk the absolute control of the car to create an unattainable strategic advantage for the rest. The use of this configuration demanded a level of trust that cannot be taught. Hamilton, on each lap, had to anticipate reactions of the car that others simply corrected on the fly. This not only speaks of his sensitivity to the wheel, but also of his total understanding of how a car behaves in limit conditions. While Leclerc worked to correct the mistakes that the car offered him, Hamilton eliminated the need to correct them from the configuration itself. It was not about turning off the fire, but of learning to dance with him. The most impressive collateral effect was how this technical commitment was reflected in the thermal management of the tires. With a much more stable and direct curve output, Hamilton drastically reduced the longitudinal stress over the compound, which allowed him to maintain more stable temperatures in the rear tires. Instead of seeing the picos of 12 to 14 degrees that were recorded in other Ferrari, Hamilton maintained the temperature inside a window of just 5 degrees. This is not just a matter of durability. It is a direct advantage in performance. A tire with less stress translates into greater traction in each return, less degradation, more exit speed, and, of course, a more constant rhythm without lifting. But perhaps the most revealing data was the level of precision with which Hamilton executed each curve under this radical setup. In an environment where a small mistake can cost you half a second, Hamilton operated with a record that seemed most simulator than a royal track. The telemetry lines were not only clean, they were repeatable, as if the car was in repetition mode, but without any help. This led some engineers to compare their pilot in Monza with that of a robot calibrated to the millimeter. And yet it was completely human. Only an exceptional human. The key here is not only Hamilton's courage, but what this experiment reveals about the true potential of SF25. Because what Ferrari believed it was a limited car, maybe it wasn't. Maybe he had simply not been taken to the right extreme. And that is a message that will change many things inside Maranello's garage. What Lewis Hamilton did in Monza was not just piloting to the limit. It was challenging the entire Ferrari technical department to rethink what they thought they were able to know about their own creation. With this extreme configuration, Hamilton did not find the car limit. He found the limit of team understanding. And he overcame it. For weeks, even months, figures such as Nico Rosberg had indicated the alleged limits of the Ferrari SF25. They called him unstable, unreliable in the rear train with a car, "I don't suit you to fight championships." In each media appearance, Rosberg was insistent. The car did not serve, and Hamilton's signing, although media, would not be enough to reverse a weak technical base. But in Monza, all these judgments were face to face with the most devastating reality, the numbers. And Rosberg, for the first time in a long time, kept silent. The former world champion, always eloquent, always critical, observed in the Sky Sports analysis room the telemetry graphics that compared Hamilton's performance with that of Leclerc and with other grille rivals. What he had in front of his eyes was not a theory. It was pure evidence. No error margins. Constant speed, absence of micro-corrections, perfect longitudinal stability. Hamilton was not only squeezing the SF25. I was showing that, in the right hands, that car could be one of the most balanced in the championship. Rosberg was left without an argument. He tried. He looked for an explanation, a yes, but an external variable. He did not find her. He could only admit that the scene was surprising. Post-career meetings in Maranello were intense. The engineers began to review the entire history of the car from the preseason tests in Bahrain to the race in Monza. They verified that, in effect, no previous batch had shown traces as stable as those recorded by Hamilton. And the most alarming, on multiple occasions the pilots had requested changes to improve stability, but no one had ever considered the idea of exploiting the car from a radically unstable configuration, such as the one asked Hamilton. Frédéric Vasseur, the team leader, was one of the first to publicly recognize that Monza marked a turning point. He declared before the media that they were fully revaluing the way they set up the car for each pilot. That Hamilton had brought a new, more aggressive, more sensitive perspective that forced Ferrari to question not only what type of car they had, but what type of team they wanted to be. One who adapts the car to the average pilot? Or one who pushes the limits with someone capable of rewriting what was believed possible? This performance not only forces us to reassess Hamilton as a pilot at this stage of his career, but also throws us a more uncomfortable and more transcendental question. What other cars in the hands of other pilots are also limited by the interpretation made of them? How much potential are wasted in the current Formula One, simply because someone who sees what others do not see, to risk what others do not dare? What we saw in Monza was no accident. It was a warning. If Hamilton is able to do this in his second real career as a Ferrari pilot, if he has already understood the bowels of a car as unstable as the SF25, then we are facing the beginning of something much bigger. And the question we should ask ourselves is not whether Hamilton can win with Ferrari. The real question is anyone to stop it? Do you think this is the beginning of a new era for Hamilton and Ferrari? Or was it just an isolated flash, An exception within a season that is still full of uncertainties? What will Mercedes and Red Bull do when you see this Ferrari level? Leave me your opinion in the comments.